So I'm here with Sam at Tring Brewery. Sam's going to show us through the process of this new Centenary beer, obviously in aid of Watford's 100 years at Vicarage Road. Hi Sam.
Yeah, welcome.
How are you?
Yes, very good, thank you.
Good.
Very good.
Let's come on in.
Tring Brewery and follow me through.
Thank you very much.
Right, so this is where the magic happens. This is where everything we make is produced in this relatively small space. But in terms of what's around us at the moment, down the far end is our main brew kit, which I'll run you through in just a second in terms of our processing. Everything around us now is either kind of fermentation vessels or other holding vessels that we can mature beer in. Like I said, our capacity in terms of brewing, we can brew up to about 5,000 litres every day, and we can do that quite comfortably 5 days a week as well. So at the moment for us in terms of annual production, it's somewhere between 2 and 2.5 million pints of beer that we produce every year.
Okay, and how long's the process from starting to it going into the barrel or bottle?
So it takes a day to brew.
Yeah.
And really depending on the beer, anywhere between kind of 3 or 4 days fermentation. And again, it will vary from beer to beer in terms of the maturation, the maturing of the beer itself. Some of that's done in the vessels, and then some of that's also done in the cask as well. But from brewing a beer to having something that you can try, it's probably about a week. But ideally, the time spent in cask, like I said, varies from beer to beer, but probably about 10 days is a minimum turnaround for any one beer. Okay, right, so this is our malt room. This is where we mill the grain ready to brew our beer with. In our silo that's in our yard, that's capable of holding 25 tonnes of malted barley, and we get that filled up every kind of 8 weeks or so. It comes to us in a whole form, so that grain is intact still. Effectively runs through this mill in this red part here, gets crushed in here, transported up into our grist case or our malt case, you could say. From there, once we've milled the grain and it's ready to brew, that's then ready for the next day's brewing.
And for the Centenary beer?
So for the Centenary beer, we thought we'd go classic.
Yeah.
So it's all English. So it's English malt, obviously, because that's what we use here at the brewery. It is all English malt. Very, very traditional in terms of its style. So it's a little touch of what's called crystal malt, so that just slightly roasted malt. That turns it from more of a kind of what we are very, very light coloured beer into a more of a golden ale that we wanted to go for the Centenary Ale. And in terms of the hops, we've gone for, again, a really, really classic variety called First Gold, which is an English variety, which has got a little bit of fruit notes to it, but a really classic old world variety. Okay. So huge amounts of kind of herbal grassiness to it, with, like I said, just a touch of kind of fruit aroma as well. Right, so the brewing process starts by mashing in. So we've taken our milled grain that started life in obviously that malt room just a second ago. We're transporting that crushed grain through this larger pipe, mixed in with warm water, and we're after quite a specific temperature. That activates the enzymes in the malt, which then convert the starch that obviously is still found within that malted barley. You're then converting that starch into fermentable sugars. And obviously later down the line in our fermentation process, we then ferment that fermentable sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide.
Right.
So like I said, what we've done first of all, it really starts off, like I said, by mashing in the grain and effectively making what looks like porridge.
Yeah.
So it all goes in the mash tun. Like I said, anywhere varies between half a ton and a ton of malt that ends up in here. It then sits in there for an hour. That's where that conversion happens, i.e. the starches are converted into sugars, effectively. Like I said, it sits in there for an hour, and from here we've started making our wort, W-O-R-T, which is just a really, really sugary solution. And we can't call it beer yet because we haven't got any alcohol in there to call it so. We're calling it wort at this stage. And what's happened in this particular vessel is all the husks of the grain have risen to the top, leaving that really sugary solution at the bottom, like I said, that we're calling wort at this stage. And then from here, we can transfer that hot wort from our mash tun into our boiler, and then we can start boiling up that wort. Effectively, so we've mashed it into our mash tun. We've separated out the wort, i.e. the sugary solution, from the husks of the grain, and then that's what we're running off at the moment.
Right.
So the grain has risen to the top, acting as a filter bed. We're rinsing that grain bed through with hot water called sparging. We're then leaving that sugary solution at the bottom, of which we're then separating out of the bottom into the underback. From the underback, we're transferring to the boiler, of which we can then start boiling that wort up.
Right, okay.
So this is just coming towards the end of the runoff now.
Yeah.
So it's relatively clear in terms of the colour, because it gets diluted. It gets diluted along that process.
Yeah.
So start off a really, really rich colour, far darker than our beer would actually normally be. And then by the end of that runoff, because we've diluted it down, we'll equilibrium into a colour of our final beer.
Right, okay.
Right, so now that we've got a nice rolling boil on, obviously we can start to see steam coming out the chimney. Like I said a second ago, we were boiling for an hour. That's where we can add those hops in, and obviously it's the balance between those in terms of the flavours that we get out. You probably will start to smell with the first hop additions probably just about to go in any second, and you'll start to smell that really lovely aroma. And obviously that means any aroma that's lost into the air is aroma that isn't ending up in the beer. Like I said, with that first hop addition, really you're after losing that aroma. It's really the bitterness that you're trying to get out of the hops and into the beer. So now that we've boiled for an hour, we've added our late hops in that we needed to for that hit of aroma. We stand for half an hour just to let all of that hop matter settle to the bottom of the boiler. From there, we can transfer through this pipe work, ending up going through our heat exchanger. So we've got that hot wort travelling one way through all of those plates. We then attach our hoses to the other end into the vessel that we're going to be transferring into. But then through this heat exchanger, we'll be transferring cold water the other way, again through all of those plates. It makes a huge surface area in there, which chills that wort down really, really quickly. Right. So you're transferring at the moment, which is now sat at 100 degrees, into our fermentation vessel, aiming for around kind of 17 degrees Celsius. And that probably takes about an hour, depending on the size of the brew, to transfer that 5,000 litres from there through into our vessels.
Yeah.
Right. So as we're transferring from our boiler through our heat exchanger, like I said, chilling it down into our fermentation vessel, aiming for a temperature of around kind of 17 degrees Celsius. So a huge step down in terms of temperature. We can then start adding our yeast. Right. It's technically our final ingredient, and it's there to turn that sugar that we converted from starch initially in our mashing stage, and it takes the fermentable sugars and ferments them into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And what yeast is a single cell fungus, and it really just does that one job. It takes the sugars and ferments it into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And depending on the beer, it normally takes around kind of 2 or 3 days to complete that fermentation process. You want to then leave the yeast in that vessel, in that beer, just for a couple of days, just to let that beer mature out ever so slightly. And then from here, you can then look at either bottling it or putting it into cask.
Okay. So in this particular cylinder, the Centenary beer, is it inside this one?
Yes. So we've got our 3,000 litres of fermenting beer in here, ready to go. And like I said, from here, fermentation is going to take about 2 or 3 days. Right. It's going to mature for a few days on the yeast. It's then going to go into a separate vessel for a week maturing before we then send that beer out for filtering and then finally bottling. Right.
So just bottling for the Centenary beer.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. Right. So you've seen how the beer is made. The most important thing is to see how it tastes.
Great. Let's go.
Right, so here we are, final finished product in all its glory. So what we talked about earlier on in terms of our colour, so we ended up with a really, really nice golden colour in there. Like I said, that colour comes from that slightly darker malt, the crystal malt, turns in from what would be a very, very light beer into something with far more kind of a golden hue to it. In terms of the hop aroma, so on the nose, straight away, it's that kind of classic, like I said, a little bit of grassy, a little bit of fruit flavour from the variety of hop we choose to use, which is called First Gold. in this particular one, which is an English variety, which again makes it kind of a very, very traditional style of beer. So probably something that everyone would have been drinking about 100 years ago, anyway. So on the nose, like I said, that kind of really hit of hop aroma, and it's on the tongue. It's going to be that nice, gentle bitterness, but it's the balance between that bitterness and that hop aroma that we talked about earlier on. Right. Hopefully, we'll hit home.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Good health.
So in terms of alcohol, it's 4.5%. So very, very sessionable in terms of the style of beer.
Yep.
And like I said, with anything like this, you're after a balance, and it's a balance between all of the flavour combinations. So it's a balance between the malt characteristic that we're going to get through. So it's a nice, rich body, and that obviously is going to come from that slightly roasted malt, that crystal malt. It also adds colour, but also that body as well to the beer. But really, it's kind of the hop characteristic that we're really looking after the balance. So like I said, it's a nice bitterness, nice lingering bitterness as well. And that's that good combination of a kind of nice, kind of grassy, herbal aroma from the variety we're choosing, but plenty on the nose as well. Like I said, overall, just a very, very well balanced combination of flavours, and that's between the malt, the alcohol, and the hops.
Okay, yeah, really nice. I'll have a little sip more.
Even at 10:15.
Well, yeah.
Be rude not to.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks very much.